The rain hammered against the tall windows of the Westbrook Memorial Hospital as reporters crowded around the entrance, their cameras ready and microphones extended. They had been waiting for 3 hours, some for even longer. The news had spread like wildfire across the city that morning. After 2 years of complete silence, Isabella, the daughter of tech billionaire Richard, was finally going to speak. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Nurses whispered to each other as they passed through corridors, and even the doctors seemed distracted by the commotion. Security guards stood at every corner, their eyes scanning the crowd that had gathered despite the terrible weather. Everyone wanted to know what the girl would say. Everyone wanted to understand what had happened that tragic night 2 years ago. Isabella sat in a wheelchair in a private room on the 4th floor. She was 17 years old now, though she looked younger than her age. Her hair, once long and carefully styled, was cut short in a simple bob. Her blue eyes, which had once sparkled with life and mischief, now held a depth that seemed far too old for someone so young. She wore a simple gray dress that her father had chosen for her, though she had not asked for it. She rarely asked for anything these days. Her father stood by the window, his phone pressed to his ear. Richard was a tall man with graying hair and sharp features that had graced the covers of countless business magazines. He was worth over $8 billion, a fortune he had built from nothing through his technology company. He had everything money could buy, except the one thing he wanted most. He wanted his daughter back, the way she used to be. "Make sure the statement is ready," Richard said into his phone, his voice low and controlled. "I want this handled perfectly, no mistakes, no surprises." A woman in her early 50s entered the room, was Richard's personal assistant and had been with him for over 15 years. She carried a leather folder and wore an expression of professional concern. Behind her came Dr. Phillips, Isabella's psychiatrist, a gentle man with kind eyes and a patient manner. Dr. Phillips said quietly, "we should discuss what Isabella might say before we go downstairs." Richard turned from the window, irritation flashing across his face. "We've already discussed this. She'll read the statement we prepared. She'll thank everyone for their support. She'll say she's recovering well, that's it." Dr. Phillips exchanged a glance before speaking again. "With respect, sir, Isabella has indicated she wants to speak freely. Forcing her to read a prepared statement might not be in her best interest right now." "Her best interest?" Richard's voice rose slightly. "I know what's best for my daughter, doctor. I've protected her for 2 years. I've kept the vultures away from her. I've given her the best care money can buy. Now she needs to show the world she's fine so we can all move forward." Isabella had been staring at her hands throughout this exchange, but now she looked up. Her voice, when it came, was soft but clear. "I'm not fine, father." The room fell silent. Richard turned to look at his daughter, and for a moment something that might have been pain crossed his face. But it was gone quickly, replaced by his usual mask of control. "You will be fine," he said firmly. "After today, this will all be behind us. You'll come home and things will go back to normal." Isabella said nothing. She simply turned her gaze back to her hands, folding them carefully in her lap. Dr. Phillips watched her with concern, noting the way her shoulders tensed and her breathing became slightly faster. These were signs he had learned to recognize over the past 2 years. The accident had happened on a cold November evening. Isabella had been 15, a sophomore at the prestigious academy. She had been driving home from a friend's house, something she had done dozens of times before. Her father had bought her a Mercedes for her 15th birthday, despite his wife's protests that she was too young. But Richard always got what he wanted, and he wanted his daughter to have the best. The police report stated that Isabella had lost control of the vehicle on a wet road. The car had skidded, struck a barrier, and flipped multiple times before coming to rest upside down in a ditch. By some miracle, Isabella had survived, though she had been trapped in the wreckage for over an hour before rescue teams could extract her. But her mother had not been so lucky. Caroline had been in the passenger seat. She had died at the scene before the ambulance even arrived. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. She was 42 years old, a former ballet dancer who had given up her career to marry Richard and raise Isabella. She had been beautiful, gentle, and according to everyone who knew her, the heart of the family. After the accident, Isabella had not spoken a single word for 2 years. Not in the hospital immediately after, not during the endless therapy sessions, not at her mother's funeral, and not in the private facility where her father had placed her for treatment. The doctors had various theories. Some believed it was the trauma of the accident itself. Others thought it was grief and guilt over her mother's death. A few suggested that Isabella might have sustained brain damage that affected her ability to speak. But 3 days ago, Isabella had spoken. A nurse had entered her room with breakfast, and Isabella had looked up and said, "Thank you." Just those 2 words, but they had been enough to send shockwaves through the hospital staff and eventually to the media. Now, as the clock approached 2 in the afternoon, it was time for Isabella to face the cameras and the world that had been waiting to hear her voice. Approached the wheelchair and knelt beside it. "Bella," she said gently, using the nickname that only she still dared to use. "Are you ready? We can wait a little longer if you need more time." Isabella looked at, and for the first time that day, something like warmth appeared in her eyes. Had always been kind to her, even before the accident. She remembered how used to sneak her chocolate when her mother was trying to enforce a healthy diet, and how she always remembered Isabella's birthday, even when her father forgot. "I'm ready," Isabella said, "but I need to say something first." Richard stepped forward quickly. "You'll have time to speak downstairs. Right now, we need to go over the statement one more time." "I'm not reading your statement, Father." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Richard's jaw tightened and held her breath. Dr. Phillips moved slightly closer to Isabella's wheelchair, a protective gesture that did not go unnoticed. "Isabella," Richard said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "We've discussed this. There are legal implications to consider. There are business implications. Your words will be analyzed by thousands of people. We need to control the narrative." "I don't care about the narrative," Isabella replied, still in that same soft but unwavering tone. "I care about the truth." "The truth," Richard repeated as if tasting the word. "The truth is that you had an accident. The truth is that your mother died. The truth is that you've been receiving excellent care and now you're ready to move forward. That's the only truth that matters." Isabella looked directly at her father, and in that moment she seemed years older than 17. "That's your truth, Father. It's not mine." Before Richard could respond, there was a knock on the door. A young security guard poked his head in, looking nervous. "Mr. Sir, they're asking if we're ready to begin. The press conference was scheduled to start 5 minutes ago." Richard took a deep breath, smoothing down his expensive silk tie. He shot one more look at Isabella, a look that combined warning and pleading in equal measure. Then he nodded too. "Let's go," he said. "And Isabella, I'm trusting you to do the right thing." Pushed the wheelchair toward the door, with Dr. Phillips walking alongside and Richard leading the way. As they moved through the corridor, hospital staff paused in their work to watch. Some offered encouraging smiles. Others simply stared with curiosity. Isabella kept her eyes straight ahead, her hands gripping the armrests of the wheelchair. They took a private elevator down to the first floor, where a small auditorium had been prepared for the press conference. As the elevator descended, Isabella could feel her heart beginning to race. She had not been in front of this many people since before the accident. She had not spoken in public since she was 15 years old, since she was a different person entirely. The elevator doors opened, and they were immediately surrounded by more security guards who formed a protective barrier as they moved toward the auditorium. Isabella could hear the murmur of voices growing louder, the shuffle of feet, the click of cameras even though they had not yet entered the room. Just before they reached the door, leaned down and whispered, "You don't have to do this if you're not ready. I can tell them you need more time." Isabella reached up and touched his hand. "I'm ready, I need to do this." The doors opened, and the noise hit them like a physical force. The auditorium was packed with reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers who had somehow managed to get inside. Lights flashed continuously, creating a disorienting strobe effect. Questions were shouted from every direction, overlapping into a cacophony of noise. "Isabella, how are you feeling? Can you tell us about the accident? Do you blame yourself for your mother's death? Are you planning to return to school? What was it like not speaking for 2 years?" Richard held up his hands, his face stern. "Please, everyone, please. There will be time for questions after Isabella makes her statement. I ask for quiet and respect." Gradually, the noise subsided to a murmur, though cameras continued to flash. Wheeled Isabella to a small raised platform where a microphone had been set up. A pitcher of water and a glass sat on a small table beside it. Richard took his position standing slightly behind his daughter, his hand resting on the back of her wheelchair in what might have looked like a supportive gesture, but felt to Isabella more like a weight. A hospital representative, a woman in a smart blue suit, approached the microphone first. "Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your patience. As you know, Isabella has not spoken publicly since the tragic accident that took her mother's life 2 years ago. Today, she has chosen to break her silence. We ask that you please hold all questions until after she has finished speaking. Isabella, whenever you're ready." The woman stepped back, and suddenly all eyes were on Isabella. The flashing lights seemed to intensify. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the video cameras and the soft whisper of the air conditioning. Isabella sat very still for a long moment. She looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar but most strange. She saw reporters she recognized from television, their expressions eager and expectant. She saw cameras pointing at her like accusing fingers. She felt her father's hand tighten slightly on the wheelchair. Then she took a breath and began to speak. "My name is Isabella," she said, her voice small at first but growing stronger with each word. "2 years ago, I was in a car accident that killed my mother, Caroline. Since that night, I have not spoken a single word until 3 days ago." She paused, taking a sip of water. The room remained silent, everyone hanging on her every word. "I know many of you have questions about why I stopped speaking. Some doctors thought I had brain damage. Others believed it was psychological trauma. My father," she glanced up at Richard, whose face had gone very still, "my father believed I was simply being difficult, but the truth is something none of them understood." Richard leaned forward, his voice low but urgent. "Isabella, stick to the statement." She ignored him, continuing to speak into the microphone. "I stopped speaking because I couldn't bear to lie anymore, and if I had spoken, I would have had to lie about what really happened that night." A ripple of excitement went through the crowd. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised over notebooks. Cameras zoomed in on Isabella's face. "The accident was not my fault," Isabella said, her voice shaking slightly now. "I was not the one driving the car that night. My mother was." The room erupted into chaos. Questions were shouted from every direction. Camera flashes became a continuous stream of light. Richard's hand clenched on the wheelchair so hard his knuckles turned white. "Isabella, that's enough," he said sharply, but his voice was drowned out by the noise from the reporters. Isabella raised her own voice to be heard. "My mother was driving because my father had been drinking at a business dinner. He called her to pick him up. She took me with her because I didn't want to stay home alone. We picked him up and he insisted on driving us home. My mother refused. They argued. Finally, she agreed to drive." The security guards were struggling now to hold back reporters who were pushing forward, desperate to get closer, to hear better, to capture every word of this unexpected confession. "My father got into the back seat and I sat in the passenger seat up front with my mother. We were almost home when another car ran a red light and hit us from the side. The impact caused us to spin and flip. Everything happened so fast. I remember my mother screaming my name. I remember the sound of metal crushing. I remember the smell of gasoline and blood." Tears were streaming down Isabella's face now, but she did not stop speaking. "When I woke up in the hospital 3 days later, my father was there. He told me that everyone believed I had been driving. He told me that the police had assumed it was me because of my age, because teenagers are known to have accidents, because it made sense. He told me that if I contradicted this story, it would destroy everything he had built. He told me that my mother would want me to protect the family legacy." "Isabella, stop this right now," Richard hissed, moving around to face her, but Dr. Phillips stepped between them, and security guards moved in to hold Richard back as he tried to reach his daughter. "For 2 years I have carried the guilt of my mother's death," Isabella continued, her voice breaking. "People looked at me with pity or judgment, believing I had killed her through careless driving. I read articles calling me a spoiled rich girl who had been given too much too soon. I heard whispers that I should be in jail. And through it all, I said nothing because I was afraid. Afraid of my father, afraid of losing everything. Afraid that speaking the truth would somehow make my mother's death meaningless." The auditorium had descended into controlled chaos. Security was trying to maintain order while reporters shouted questions and cameras captured every moment of what was rapidly becoming the biggest scandal to hit the Billionaire family. "But 3 days ago," Isabella said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper but still caught by the microphone, "someone helped me understand that the truth matters more than fear. Someone showed me that remaining silent was not protecting my mother's memory but betraying it." She took another shaky breath. "There is someone I need to thank. Someone who, for the past 2 years, has been the only person who treated me with genuine kindness, who never judged me, who saw me as a person rather than a tragedy or a scandal. Her name is Grace Mitchell, and she is a waitress at the hospital cafeteria. This statement, somehow even more unexpected than the rest, caused another wave of confusion among the reporters. Several of them were frantically typing on their phones, no doubt trying to find information about this Grace Mitchell. Isabella looked directly into the cameras now, her tear-stained face defiant. Grace has been bringing me food, talking to me even when I couldn't respond, reading to me, and treating me like a human being when everyone else treated me like a project to be fixed or a problem to be managed. She never asked me for anything. She never tried to use me. She simply cared. Richard had given up trying to reach Isabella and now stood to the side, his face pale with fury and shock, his career and reputation crumbling around him in real time. 3 days ago, Grace sat with me like she had done countless times before. She was reading to me from a book, and she stopped and said something that changed everything. She said, "Bella, honey, I don't know what you're carrying, but whatever it is, it's too heavy for one person to bear alone. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is tell the truth, even when it's hard." And that's when I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. Isabella's hands were trembling as she gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. "So today, I'm telling the truth. My father lied about the accident to protect his reputation and his business. He asked me to bear the guilt of something I didn't do. He isolated me in facilities where I couldn't contradict his story. And when I finally started to heal enough to speak, he tried to control what I would say." She looked directly at where her father stood, meeting his eyes for the first time since she had started speaking. "I don't hate you, Father, but I can't lie for you anymore. Mom deserves better than that. I deserve better than that." Then Isabella did something that shocked everyone in the room even more than her words had. She looked into the camera and said, "Grace Mitchell, if you're watching this, thank you. Thank you for showing me what real kindness looks like. Thank you for treating me like a daughter when my own father treated me like a liability. In my heart, where it really matters, you're more of a mother to me than anyone else has been these past 2 years. I love you, and I hope you can forgive me for bringing you into all of this." With that, Isabella slumped back in her wheelchair, exhausted. The room exploded into Grace Mitchell was in the hospital cafeteria kitchen when her world changed forever. She was wiping down the stainless steel counter, preparing for the afternoon rush, when her burst through the door with her phone held out. "Grace, Grace, you need to see this right now." The eyes were wide with shock. Grace looked up from her work, concerned by the urgency in his voice. "What's wrong? Is someone hurt?" "It's you, you're on the news," thrust the phone into Grace's hands. Grace looked down at the screen, her weathered hands still damp from cleaning. There, playing on a live news feed, was Isabella sitting in a wheelchair in front of what looked like hundreds of reporters. Grace's heart stopped as she heard the girl's voice, clear and strong, saying words that Grace could barely process. Her name is Grace Mitchell, and she is a waitress at the hospital cafeteria. The phone nearly slipped from Grace's fingers. She had to grab the edge of the counter to steady herself as she continued to watch. Around her, other kitchen staff had gathered, all staring at the phone as Isabella continued to speak, calling Grace the kindest person in her life, thanking her, and then saying those words that would echo in Grace's mind for days to come. "In my heart, where it really matters, you're more of a mother to me than anyone else has been these past 2 years." "Oh, my Lord," Grace whispered, her hand coming up to cover her mouth. Tears sprang to her eyes, blurring her vision. The phone was snatched away by another who wanted to see, and suddenly everyone was talking at once, bombarding Grace with questions. When did she meet Isabella? Why didn't she tell anyone? Did she know about the scandal? Was she really like a mother to the billionaire's daughter? Grace couldn't answer any of them. She could barely breathe. She backed away from the crowd, stumbling slightly, and found herself sitting heavily on one of the kitchen stools. Her mind was racing, trying to understand what had just happened and what it would mean. She was 53 years old, a black woman who had worked as a waitress for 30 years, the last 5 of them at Westbrook Memorial Hospital. She had raised 2 sons on her own after her husband died of cancer when the boys were still in elementary school. She had worked double shifts, sacrificed her own needs, and done everything in her power to give her children a good life. Both of her sons had grown up, moved away, and started their own families. They called sometimes, visited on holidays, but Grace often felt the emptiness of her small apartment. Working at the hospital had become more than just a job for Grace. She genuinely cared about the patients, especially the long-term ones. She learned their names, their preferences, their stories. She would spend extra time with those who seemed lonely or afraid. The hospital administration had noticed her compassion and had even given her a commendation last year for exceptional patient interaction. 2 years ago, when Isabella had been admitted to the hospital and then transferred to the private psychiatric facility on the 7th floor, Grace had been assigned to the cafeteria shift that served that wing. She had first seen Isabella about a week after the girl arrived. The nurses had wheeled her down to a private dining area for a change of scenery, hoping it might help with her recovery. Grace had served Isabella her meal, a simple soup and sandwich that the girl didn't touch. Isabella had sat there, staring at nothing, her beautiful face blank and her eyes empty. Something about her had broken Grace's heart. She saw in this girl a kind of loneliness that transcended wealth or privilege. It was the loneliness of profound loss, something Grace understood all too well. "Honey, would you like something different?" Grace had asked gently. "Maybe some hot chocolate. I make it special with cinnamon. My boys used to love it." Isabella hadn't responded, hadn't even acknowledged that Grace had spoken. But Grace had brought the hot chocolate anyway, made with care, and left it on the table. The next day, the cup had been empty. That had been the beginning. Day after day, Grace would bring Isabella her meals, always taking a few extra moments to talk to her even though the girl never responded. She would tell Isabella about her day, about funny things that happened in the cafeteria, about her sons and their families. She spoke about her late husband, about her garden, about the birds that visited her window feeder. At first, the nurses had told Grace not to bother, that Isabella wouldn't respond and probably couldn't even hear her properly. But Grace had continued anyway. Something told her that Isabella was listening, that somewhere inside that silent exterior, the girl was taking in every word. As months passed, Grace had begun to bring books from her personal collection. She would sit with Isabella during her breaks, reading aloud. They went through To Kill a Mockingbird, The Secret Garden, Little Women, and dozens of others. Grace would watch Isabella's face as she read, looking for any sign of reaction. Sometimes she thought she saw a flicker of something in the girl's eyes, a slight change in expression, but it was always so subtle she couldn't be sure. The hospital administration had questioned Grace about the time she spent with Isabella. Mr. had complained that his daughter was receiving too much attention from the staff, that she needed to be left alone to heal. Grace had been warned to limit her interactions to simple meal service. She had nodded, agreed, and then continued exactly as before, just being more discreet about it. Grace had recognized something in Isabella that others seemed to miss. This wasn't just trauma or grief. This was a child carrying a terrible burden, something too heavy for her young shoulders. Grace had seen it before in her own sons when they were struggling with their father's death but trying to be strong for her. She had learned then that sometimes people, especially children, needed permission to be broken, to be vulnerable, to admit when something was too much to bear. 3 days ago, Grace had been reading to Isabella as usual. It was a slow afternoon, and she had taken her full 30-minute break to sit with the girl. She had been reading from Anne of Green Gables, one of Grace's favorites, when she had paused and looked at Isabella. The girl had been staring out the window, as she often did, her face expressionless. But something about her posture, the way her shoulders were hunched, the tension in her jaw, had made Grace set the book aside. "Bella, honey," Grace had said softly, using the nickname that had come naturally after months of one-sided conversations. "I don't know what you're carrying, but whatever it is, it's too heavy for one person to bear alone. I learned that when my husband died. I tried to carry everything by myself, be strong for my boys, never show weakness, but you know what? That nearly broke me. It wasn't until I started telling the truth about how hard things were, until I stopped trying to protect everyone else and admitted I was drowning, that things started to get better." Grace had reached over and gently taken Isabella's hand. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is tell the truth, even when it's hard, even when people won't like it, even when it feels like speaking up might make things worse. Because staying silent, living with a lie, that's a different kind of death. It kills you slowly from the inside out." Isabella had turned to look at her then, really look at her, for the first time in all the months they had spent together. Her blue eyes had filled with tears. "I see you, baby girl," Grace had whispered. "I see you hurting, and I want you to know that whatever the truth is, whatever you're hiding, it's okay to let it out. You deserve to be free." Grace had left shortly after that, needing to get back to work. She hadn't expected anything to come of their conversation. It had been just another moment in 2 years of moments, another attempt to reach a girl who seemed unreachable. But the next day, when Grace had brought Isabella her breakfast, the girl had looked up at her and said, "Thank you." Grace had nearly dropped the tray. Those two simple words, the first Isabella had spoken in 2 years, and they had been directed at her. Grace had wanted to cry, to laugh, to pull the girl into a hug, but she had simply smiled and said, "You're welcome, honey. It's good to hear your voice." Now, sitting in the hospital kitchen with her buzzing around her and her phone ringing non-stop with calls from unknown numbers, Grace tried to process what Isabella had done. The girl had exposed her father's lies on national television. She had admitted the truth about the accident. And she had called Grace, a cafeteria worker she had known for 2 years, a mother figure. Grace's hands trembled as she stood up. She needed air. She needed space to think. She pushed through the crowd of and out into the hallway. The corridor was bustling with activity, people rushing past, but Grace barely noticed. She made her way to a small break room that was usually empty this time of day. She had just sat down when her phone rang again. This time, she recognized the number. It was her son. Mom, are you okay? I just saw the news." His voice was panicked. "I'm fine, baby. I'm in shock, that's all. They're saying you were like a mother to that billionaire's daughter. Is that true? How long have you known her?" Grace took a deep breath and began to explain. As she talked, describing her relationship with Isabella over the past 2 years, she could hear the surprise in her son's voice. He hadn't known. She had never mentioned Isabella specifically, just talked generally about patients she cared about. "Mom, this is huge. Do you understand? That girl just accused one of the richest men in the country of covering up the truth about his wife's death. And she named you, specifically you, in front of everyone. You're going to be all over the news." Grace's stomach churned at the thought. "I didn't ask for this. I was just trying to help a girl who was hurting." "I know, Mom, I know. But that doesn't change what's about to happen. You need to be prepared. Reporters are probably already looking for you." As if on cue, someone knocked on the break room door. Grace's supervisor, Mrs., poked her head in. Her expression was grave. "Grace, there are reporters in the lobby asking for you. Hospital security is keeping them out, but we need to figure out how to handle this. The administration wants to meet with you immediately." Grace's heart sank. This was exactly what she had feared. "I'll be right there," she said. After hanging up with and promising to call him later, Grace followed Mrs. through the corridors to the administrative offices. As they walked, Grace could feel eyes on her. Staff members whispered as she passed. Some smiled encouragingly. Others looked concerned or curious. In the conference room, Grace found herself facing 3 hospital administrators, including the CEO, Mr. They all looked serious, almost stern, and Grace felt a flutter of fear. Was she in trouble? Was she going to lose her job? "Mrs. Mitchell," Mr. began, his voice formal. "I'm sure you're aware of the situation that's developed this afternoon." "Yes, sir." "Can you explain your relationship with Isabella?" Grace sat up in her chair. She had done nothing wrong, and she would not apologize for showing kindness to someone who needed it. "I served her meals during my shifts. Over time, I began talking to her, keeping her company during my breaks, reading to her. She never responded, but I felt like she needed someone to care about her as a person, not as a patient or a problem." "Were you aware of the nature of her father's visits, the restrictions he had placed on staff interactions?" "I was told to limit my contact to meal service, yes, but I continued to spend time with her on my own breaks. I wasn't trying to cause any trouble. I just saw a child in pain and I wanted to help." One of the other administrators, a woman Grace didn't recognize, leaned forward. "Mrs. Mitchell, do you understand the position this puts the hospital in? Richard is a major donor to this facility. If what his daughter says is true, and he's been lying about the circumstances of his wife's death, the hospital could be seen as complicit in his deception." "With respect, ma'am, the hospital didn't know about any deception. Isabella never spoke to anyone. How could we have known?" Mr. held up his hand. "That's a fair point. However, we now have a situation where one of our employees has been named in what's becoming a national scandal. We need to know everything, Mrs. Mitchell. Did Isabella ever tell you what really happened that night? Did you know the truth before today?" "No, sir. She never told me anything. Like I said, she never spoke until 3 days ago, and even then it was just to say thank you. I had no idea about any of this until I saw her press conference on the news, same as everyone else." The administrators exchanged glances. Mr. tapped his pen on the table, clearly thinking. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm going to be frank with you. The media is going to be relentless in trying to get to you. They'll want interviews, statements, anything they can get. We need you to agree not to speak to the press without clearance from our legal team. Grace felt a flash of indignation. Am I being threatened, sir? No, not at all. We're trying to protect you and the hospital. This is going to be a media circus, and anything you say can and will be twisted. We're offering you legal support and guidance to navigate this situation. What if I don't want your legal support? What if I just want to continue doing my job and stay out of all this? I'm afraid that's not going to be possible, the female administrator said. Not anymore. The press knows your name. They know where you work. This is happening whether you like it or not. Grace felt tears of frustration building behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had spent her life working hard, keeping her head down, taking care of others. She didn't want fame or attention. She certainly didn't want to be caught up in a scandal involving billionaires and cover-ups. What do you want from me? She asked quietly. Mr.'s expression softened slightly. We want you to take some time off with pay until this blows over. We'll provide you with security if needed. We'll give you a liaison to handle media requests, and we ask that you refer all questions to our legal team. Can you do that? Grace thought about Isabella, about the courage it must have taken for that girl to speak the truth after 2 years of silence. She thought about what she had told Isabella just 3 days ago, about being brave enough to tell the truth even when it was hard. I'll take the time off, Grace said slowly, and I'll consider the legal support, but I need to make something clear. If Isabella needs me, if she reaches out to me, I'm going to be there for her. I don't care who her father is or what kind of scandal this becomes. That girl needs someone on her side, someone who cares about her as a person. I'm not going to abandon her just because things got complicated. The administrators looked at each other again. Finally, Mr. nodded. We understand. Just please be careful. Richard is a powerful man, and he's not going to take kindly to what his daughter has done. By extension, he may not take kindly to you either. I'm not afraid of Richard, Grace said, though in truth, she was a little afraid. But fear wasn't going to stop her from doing what was right. After the meeting, Grace was escorted out of the hospital through a side entrance to avoid the reporters who had gathered at the main doors. A security guard drove her home in his personal vehicle, taking a roundabout route to make sure they weren't followed. When Grace finally reached her small apartment, she locked the door behind her and leaned against it, exhaling deeply. The afternoon sun streamed through her windows, falling on the modest furniture and the family photos that lined her walls. Everything looked the same as it had this morning, but Grace's world had fundamentally changed. She made herself a cup of tea and sat down in her favorite chair by the window. Her phone continued to buzz with calls and messages, but she ignored it. She needed time to think, to process everything that had happened. Isabella's face kept appearing in her mind. That beautiful, sad girl who had carried such a heavy burden for so long. Grace thought about all the hours they had spent together, all the one-sided conversations, all the books they had read. She had done it out of simple kindness, never expecting anything in return. And now Isabella had called her mom. Not her own mother figure or a mother-like person, but simply mom. The word carried so much weight, so much meaning. It spoke of trust, of love, of a bond that transcended blood and circumstance. Grace's own sons had been good boys, and they were good men now. She was proud of them. But they had their own lives, their own families. Grace had accepted her role as the grandmother who got visited on holidays, the mother who got phone calls once a week. She had never expected to feel needed again in the way that Isabella seemed to need her. As evening fell and the shadows lengthened in her apartment, Grace made a decision. Whatever came next, whatever storm was brewing around Isabella's revelation, Grace would stand firm. She had told Isabella to be brave enough to tell the truth. Now Grace would be brave enough to stand by that truth and by the girl who had finally found her voice. Her phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed an unknown number with a local area code. Grace hesitated, then answered. Mrs. Mitchell, the voice was young, female, and shaking. This is Isabella. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to drag you into all of this. I needed people to understand what you did for me. But if I've made things difficult for you, I'm so sorry. Grace felt her heart swell. Oh, honey, don't you apologize. You did what you needed to do. You told the truth. That took incredible courage. Are you okay? The reporters, have they been bothering you? I'm fine, baby girl. The hospital is taking care of things, don't worry about me. There was silence on the other end, and then Isabella's voice came through, barely a whisper. Thank you for not being angry with me. Angry, sweetheart, I could never be angry with you. I'm proud of you. Your mother would be proud of you. Isabella began to cry, and Grace found herself crying too, both of them connected across the phone line, sharing grief and relief and fear and hope all at once. When Isabella finally spoke again, her voice was steadier. Grace, can I ask you something? Anything, honey. Would you be willing to see me, to still be part of my life? I know my father will try to keep us apart now. I know this is asking a lot, and you have your own family and your own life, but I don't have anyone else. Not really. And you're the only person who's ever made me feel safe. Grace didn't hesitate. Of course I will, Bella. You just tell me when and where, and I'll be there. I meant what I said in that break room about not abandoning you. I keep my promises. Thank you, Isabella whispered. Thank you so much. I have to go now. The doctors are coming, and I think my father is trying to get back in. But I'll call you again soon, okay? You call me anytime, day or night. You hear me? After they hung up, Grace sat in the darkness of her apartment, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. She had purpose again. Someone needed her, truly needed her, and she would not let that person down. Outside her window, she could see news vans pulling up to her building. The media had found her. The storm was beginning. But Grace Mitchell had weathered storms before, and she would weather this one too. For Richard sat alone in his penthouse office, the city lights stretching out before him like a carpet of stars. It was past midnight, but sleep was impossible. The leather chair creaked under his weight as he poured another glass of scotch, his third in the past hour. The amber liquid caught the light from the desk lamp, the only illumination in the vast space. His phone lay face down on the mahogany desk, silent now after hours of constant calls. His lawyers, his board members, his publicist, his business partners all demanding explanations, offering strategies, predicting outcomes. He had stopped answering around 10 o'clock, unable to face one more conversation about damage control and media strategy. The television across the room played on mute, cycling through news channels that all showed the same footage. Isabella in her wheelchair, speaking into the microphone with surprising strength. His carefully constructed narrative crumbling in real time. Analysts discussing the legal implications. Former business associates being interviewed, all of them suddenly claiming they had always suspected something was off about the accident report. Richard took a long drink and closed his eyes, but that only made it worse. Behind his closed eyelids, he saw Caroline, his wife, beautiful and kind, looking at him with disappointment the way she used to when he prioritized work over family. The way she had looked at him that night, when he had called her drunk from the restaurant and demanded she pick him up. He remembered that night with painful clarity, though he had tried for 2 years to bury the memories. The business dinner had gone well. A major deal had been finalized, worth hundreds of millions. They had celebrated with expensive wine and top-shelf liquor. Richard had known he was drinking too much, but he hadn't cared. He was Richard, rules didn't apply to him. When the dinner ended, he had been too proud to call a car service. That would have required admitting he couldn't handle his alcohol. So he had called Caroline instead, waking her up at 11:30 on a cold November night, telling her to come get him. She had protested. It was late. She was already in her nightgown. Couldn't he just get a driver? But Richard had insisted, his voice taking on that edge that she recognized, the tone that meant arguing was pointless. Caroline had agreed, as she always did. But she had brought Isabella with her, perhaps as a form of quiet rebellion, forcing Richard to see the inconvenience he was causing his family. The drive home had been tense. Caroline had been tight-lipped with anger, and Isabella had been silent in the back seat, her headphones in, probably trying to escape the uncomfortable atmosphere. Richard had tried to cajole Caroline into a better mood, making jokes and promises, but she hadn't softened. Then 3 blocks from home it had happened. A pickup truck running a red light the driver later revealed to be texting. The impact on the passenger side where Caroline sat. The world spinning, metal shrieking, glass shattering, and then darkness. Richard had woken up in the hospital with minor injuries. A concussion, some bruised ribs, cuts on his face from broken glass. Isabella had been in surgery, and Caroline had been dead. In those first confused hours, as Richard tried to piece together what had happened, a police officer had mentioned that teenage drivers often lost control in bad weather. The officer had assumed Isabella had been driving, a natural assumption given her age, and the fact that Richard and his wife would logically have been in the front seats together. Richard, still disoriented from the concussion and the shock, hadn't corrected him. And then, as the hours passed and he began to understand the implications, he had made a choice. A terrible choice. He had let the assumption stand. It had been easier than he ever imagined. The police had no reason to question their initial theory. Witnesses had been too far away to see clearly who had been driving. The car's damage made it impossible to determine seating positions with certainty. And Richard, respectable billionaire that he was, had simply nodded along when they expressed sympathy that his daughter's inexperience had led to such a tragedy. When Isabella woke up 3 days later, confused and traumatized, Richard had been there. He had held her hand and told her gently that everyone believed she had been driving. He had watched her face as the implications sank in, watched the horror and disbelief dawn in her eyes. "But I wasn't driving," she had whispered, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube that had only been removed hours before. "Mom was driving. You were in the back. I was next to Mom." "I know that, sweetheart," Richard had said, squeezing her hand. "But no one else needs to know. Think about it, Isabella. If the truth comes out, people will know I was drinking. They'll know I called your mother out in the middle of the night. They'll know she was tired, possibly distracted by worry about me. They'll crucify me in the press. My company's stock will plummet. Our family will lose everything I've built." "But people think I killed Mom," Isabella had said, tears streaming down her face. "They think it was my fault." "It was no one's fault. It was an accident. A drunk driver ran a red light. That's the truth. Whether people think you were driving or your mother was driving doesn't change what really happened. But if we tell the truth now, it will destroy everything. Your mother wouldn't want that." He had said more, much more, over the following days and weeks. He had convinced himself he was protecting his daughter, protecting their future, honoring Caroline's memory by preserving what she had helped him build. He had genuinely believed, or told himself he believed, that he was doing the right thing. And then Isabella had stopped speaking entirely. At first, Richard had thought it was medical, some consequence of her injuries. But as the doctors ruled out physical causes, he began to understand. His daughter had retreated into silence rather than live with the lie he had asked her to maintain. Part of him had been relieved. A silent Isabella couldn't contradict his story. But another part, a part he tried hard to ignore, had felt something like shame. He watched his daughter withdraw further and further into herself, becoming a ghost of the vibrant girl she had been, and he knew he was responsible. For 2 years, he had maintained the illusion. He had kept Isabella in the best facilities, convinced himself he was ensuring she received excellent care. He had limited her contact with others, telling himself it was for her protection. He had controlled the narrative, managed the press, presented himself as a devoted father dealing with a tragic situation with grace and dignity. And all the while, his daughter had been drowning in guilt that wasn't hers to bear. Now, sitting in his office with the city spread before him, Richard finally admitted the truth to himself. He had been a coward. He had sacrificed his daughters for his reputation. He had asked a 15-year-old girl to carry a burden that a grown man should have carried himself. The scotch burned his throat, but he welcomed the pain. It was nothing compared to what Isabella must have felt. Nothing compared to what she was feeling now, having finally spoken the truth and knowing the firestorm it would create. Richard picked up his phone and scrolled through the messages he had been ignoring. Most were from business associates, lawyers, and PR people, but buried among them was a text from his assistant. "Isabella is asking for you. She wants to talk. Please, Richard, whatever you've done, she's still your daughter." Richard stared at the message, sent 3 hours ago. His finger hovered over the call button, but he couldn't bring himself to press it. What could he say to her? How could he possibly explain or justify what he had done? Another message caught his eye, this one from his lawyer. "We need to discuss strategy immediately. The press is running with Isabella's story. Technology's stock is down 15% in after-hours trading. We need to get ahead of this or you're going to lose everything." Lose everything. The words echoed in Richard's mind. But hadn't he already lost everything that mattered? His wife was dead. His daughter had just publicly denounced him. His company, his fortune, his reputation, what did any of it matter without family? Richard thought about Grace Mitchell, the cafeteria worker his daughter had called Mom in front of the entire world. He had never even heard the woman's name before today. He tried to remember if he had ever seen her during his visits to Isabella, but he couldn't recall. He had been so focused on managing his daughter's treatment. on controlling the situation, that he had never noticed the woman who had apparently been the only source of genuine comfort in Isabella's life. His phone buzzed with another call. This time it was James, the chairman of his board of directors. Richard considered ignoring it, but something made him answer. "Richard, we need to meet first thing tomorrow morning," James said without preamble. "The board is concerned, very concerned. We need to hear your side of this story." "My side," Richard repeated, his voice hollow. "What side is there, James? My daughter told the truth. I lied about the accident to protect myself." There was a pause on the other end. "Are you admitting that what she said is accurate?" "Would it matter if it? Who would believe me now? My own daughter has accused me on television in front of millions of people." "Richard, listen to me. You're in shock. You're not thinking clearly. Don't say anything to anyone, especially not on the phone. We'll figure this out. We'll find a way to salvage the situation." "I don't want to salvage anything," Richard said, surprised by the words even as he spoke them. "I'm tired, James. I'm tired of protecting an image. I'm tired of calculating every move. I'm tired of losing the people I love because I was too busy building an empire." "Richard, you're not making sense. Get some sleep. We'll talk in the morning when you're more rational." After James hung up, Richard sat in silence. The clock on his desk showed it was nearly 1 in the morning. In a few hours, the news cycle would start again. More analysis, more speculation, more destruction of his carefully built reputation. He thought about Caroline again, about their early years together when they had been happy. She had been a ballet dancer when they met, performing with a small company in the city. Richard had been a young entrepreneur then, ambitious but not yet successful, working 18-hour days to get his first startup off the ground. Caroline had been everything he wasn't: artistic, spontaneous, warm. She had loved him despite his rough edges and workaholic tendencies. She had believed in him when venture capitalists laughed at his ideas. She had stood by him through the early failures and near bankruptcies. When they married, she had given up her dancing career without complaint, though Richard knew she had loved it. She had focused on making a home for them, and later on raising Isabella. Richard had told himself he was providing for them, that his long hours and constant travel were for their benefit. But the truth was, he had been building something for himself, feeding his own ego and ambition. Caroline had grown quieter over the years. She had stopped sharing her opinions about his business decisions. She had retreated into her own world of charity work and parenting. Richard had barely noticed, too consumed with his next deal, his next acquisition, his next triumph. And then, in one terrible moment, she was gone. And Richard had been so afraid of losing what he had built that he had destroyed what remained of his family to protect it. The realization hit him with physical force. He had lost everything the moment Caroline died, but he had been too blind to see it. Everything that came after, all his efforts to maintain his position and reputation, had been meaningless, worse than meaningless. They had cost him his daughter. Richard stood up abruptly, the sudden movement making his head spin. He grabbed his phone and his jacket. He needed to see Isabella. He needed to try, even if it was hopeless, to make her understand how sorry he was. The drive to the hospital took 20 minutes. The city streets were mostly empty at this hour, which Richard was grateful for. He couldn't face people right now, couldn't bear the thought of being recognized. When he arrived at Westbrook Memorial, he found security guards at the entrance, clearly on high alert because of the day's events. They recognized him immediately, their expressions shifting to something between sympathy and suspicion. "I need to see my daughter," Richard said. One of the guards, a young man with a stern face, shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir, but we have instructions that you're not allowed up to the psychiatric wing without prior authorization." "Authorization? She's my daughter." "Sir, those are the orders we've been given. If you'd like, I can call the supervising physician and see if they'll make an exception." Richard wanted to argue to pull rank, to remind them who he was and how much money he had donated to this hospital. But he stopped himself. That was the old Richard, the one who thought power and money could solve everything. That Richard had destroyed his family. "Yes," he said quietly, "please call them." The guard made the call, speaking in low tones. After a few minutes, he hung up and turned back to Richard. "Dr. Phillips says he'll meet you in the lobby. He'll escort you up if Isabella agrees to see you." Richard nodded and moved to the waiting area. The lobby was empty except for a tired-looking receptionist and a janitor slowly mopping the floors. Richard sat in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, feeling more out of place than he ever had in his life. Dr. Phillips arrived after about 10 minutes. He looked exhausted, his usually neat appearance rumpled and his eyes shadowed with fatigue. He regarded Richard with an expression that was hard to read. "Mister," he said, his tone professional but cool, "this is highly irregular. Normally, I wouldn't allow any visitors at this hour, especially given the circumstances. But Isabella heard you were here, and she's agreed to see you." "She has," Richard felt a surge of hope. "Yes, but mister, I need to be clear. I'll be present during your conversation. If at any point Isabella becomes distressed or asks you to leave, you will leave immediately. Do you understand?" "Of course, yes, I just need to talk to her." They rode the elevator in silence. Dr. Phillips watched Richard carefully, as if concerned he might become violent or unstable. Richard tried to organize his thoughts, to figure out what he would say, but his mind was a jumble of regrets and apologies. Isabella's room was at the end of a quiet hallway. Dr. Phillips knocked softly before opening the door. "Isabella, your father is here." Richard stepped into the room, his heart pounding. Isabella was sitting in a chair by the window, looking out at the city lights below. She was wearing simple cotton pajamas, her short hair slightly messy. She looked so young, so fragile, that Richard felt his throat tighten. "Hello, father," she said without turning around. Her voice was calm, but Richard could hear the tension underneath. "Isabella," Richard moved further into the room but stopped, unsure if he should approach her. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I wasn't sure I would, but Dr. Phillips convinced me that we needed to talk." Richard glanced at the doctor, who had positioned himself near the door, watching them both carefully. "Isabella, I don't know where to begin. I've spent the entire night trying to figure out what to say to you." "Then don't say anything," Isabella said, finally turning to look at him. Her blue eyes, so like Caroline's, were direct and unwavering. "Just answer me one question truthfully. Did you ever feel guilty? Even once in 2 years, did you feel bad about what you asked me to do?" Richard felt something break inside him. "Every day," he whispered. "Every single day, watching you retreat into silence, watching you suffer, it was killing me. But I was too much of a coward to admit it, too afraid of losing everything. And now that I've told the truth and you're going to lose everything anyway. Now I realize that I already lost everything that mattered the night your mother died. The company, the money, the reputation, it's all meaningless without you, without family." Isabella studied him for a long moment. "Do you know why I finally spoke, why I told the truth?" "The cafeteria worker, Grace Mitchell, she convinced you." "She didn't convince me of anything. She just showed me what it looks like when someone cares about you without wanting anything in return. She spent 2 years talking to me, reading to me, sitting with me, and she never asked for anything. She never tried to make me someone I wasn't. She never needed me to protect her reputation or make her look good. She just cared." The implication was clear, and it cut Richard to the bone. "And I did the opposite. You asked me to lie to protect you. You isolated me when I couldn't bear to live with that lie. You treated me like a problem to be managed instead of a daughter who needed her father." "I know, God, Isabella, I know, and I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't give me back 2 years of my life. Sorry doesn't bring Mom back. Sorry doesn't undo the damage." Richard moved closer slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "You're right. Nothing I say can fix what I've done. But I need you to know that I loved your mother. I love you. I just got so twisted up in my own fear and pride that I lost sight of what mattered." "Did you love Mom? Really?" Isabella's voice cracked slightly. "Because if you loved her, you would have told the truth about that night. You would have honored her memory instead of using her death to protect yourself." The words were like knives, but Richard didn't flinch from them. He deserved this. He deserved far worse. "You're right. I didn't honor her. I was selfish and scared. But Isabella, your mother loved you more than anything in the world. She would have done anything to protect you. And in some twisted way, I convinced myself that protecting our family's stability was protecting you." "Our family's stability? We don't have a family anymore, Father. We haven't had one since Mom died. We've just been 2 people living in the same nightmare, pretending everything was fine." Richard felt tears building behind his eyes, something he hadn't experienced in years. "What can I do? Tell me what I can do to make this better." Isabella looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm. "You can tell the truth, publicly. You can admit what you did and face the consequences. You can stop trying to control the narrative and just be honest for once. The board will force me out. The company's stock will crash even further. I'll probably face legal charges. I know, but that's what happens when you lie and cover things up. Actions have consequences. Richard nodded slowly. You're right, you're absolutely right. He took a deep breath. I'll do it. Tomorrow I'll hold a press conference and tell the truth, all of it. Isabella's expression softened slightly, though suspicion still lingered in her eyes. Why? Why now? Is it because you actually feel remorse or because you realize the damage is already done? Both, Richard admitted. I won't lie to you anymore, Isabella. Yes, part of it is because the truth is already out there and denying it would be pointless. But part of it, the bigger part, is because I'm tired of being the person I've become. I'm tired of choosing my image over my daughter. I'm tired of living with the weight of what I've done. Dr. Phillips, who had been silently observing from near the door, spoke up. Isabella, how are you feeling? Do you need a break? Isabella shook her head. I'm okay. She turned back to her father. If you do this, if you tell the truth, it doesn't mean we're suddenly okay. It doesn't mean I forgive you or that we'll have some kind of reconciliation. I understand. I have a lot of anger toward you, a lot of hurt, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to get past it. I understand that too. But, Isabella said, her voice softening slightly, if you really do tell the truth, if you really do take responsibility for what happened, then maybe someday we can start to rebuild something. Not what we had before, but something honest. Richard felt the tears finally escape, rolling down his cheeks. He made no move to wipe them away. That's more than I deserve, thank you. Isabella stood up from her chair and moved to the window, putting distance between them again. You should go now. I'm tired and I need to rest. Of course, Isabella, one more thing. This Grace Mitchell, the woman who helped you. I'd like to thank her personally if she'll allow it. Grace doesn't want your money or your thanks. She helped me because that's who she is. Don't try to make her part of your redemption story. I won't, but I'd still like to meet her, to understand the person who gave my daughter what I couldn't. Isabella turned to look at him one last time. Then you'll have to ask her yourself. But I'm warning you, Grace is protective of me, and she doesn't care how rich or powerful you are. Richard almost smiled at that. Good, I'm glad you have someone like that in your life. As Richard left the room, escorted by Dr. Phillips back to the elevator, he felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Not peace exactly, but perhaps the beginning of it. He had a long road ahead, full of consequences he had tried to avoid. His reputation would be destroyed. His career would likely end. He might face criminal charges. But for the first time since Caroline's death, he felt like he was finally doing the right thing. Not the easy thing, not the profitable thing, but the right thing. And if it meant he might someday have a chance to ray 3 weeks after Isabella's press conference, Grace Mitchell stood in front of her bathroom mirror, smoothing down the collar of her best dress. It was navy blue with small white flowers, the same dress she wore to church on important Sundays and to her son's graduation ceremonies. She studied her reflection, noting the new lines of stress around her eyes and the gray hair she hadn't had time to color. The past 3 weeks had been the most overwhelming of Grace's life. The day after Isabella's revelation, reporters had camped outside her apartment building. They had followed her to the grocery store, shouted questions at her from across the street, and even tried to interview her neighbors for any scrap of information about her relationship with the billionaire's daughter. The hospital had been true to their word, providing her with legal support and keeping her on paid leave. But Grace had quickly realized that hiding wasn't sustainable. She couldn't live in fear forever, couldn't spend the rest of her life avoiding the outside world. So 2 weeks ago, she had agreed to one interview. Just one, with a respected journalist who had promised to focus on her genuine relationship with Isabella rather than sensationalizing the scandal. Grace had spent an hour talking about how she had come to know Isabella, about their quiet afternoons reading together, about the patience required to care for someone who couldn't respond. She had not spoken ill of Richard, though the interviewer had tried to coax criticism from her. Grace had simply said, I don't know what was in that man's heart. I only know what was in his daughter's, and that was pain. My job wasn't to judge him, it was to care for her. The interview had aired last week, and the response had been overwhelming. Thousands of people had reached out through social media, through the hospital, through any channel they could find. Some praised Grace for her compassion. Others wanted to make her a symbol of something larger, about class divisions or racial dynamics or the power of simple kindness in a complex world. Grace had tried to stay grounded through it all, reminding herself that she had simply done what any decent person would do. But she couldn't deny that her life had fundamentally changed. She couldn't go back to anonymous shifts in the cafeteria, serving meals while watching patients from a comfortable distance. She was known now, recognized, pulled into a story that was much bigger than her. Today was different, though. Today, she was going to see Isabella again for the first time since the press conference. The girl had been transferred from the hospital to a private facility, a place that focused on long-term rehabilitation and reintegration rather than medical treatment. Isabella had called Grace 3 days ago, asking if she would visit. "I need to see you," Isabella had said, her voice small and uncertain. "I need to see a friendly face. Everyone here is nice, but they're professionals. They're paid to care. You're different." Grace had agreed immediately, of course. She had been waiting for this invitation, hoping Isabella hadn't regretted pulling her into this mess. Now, as Grace grabbed her purse and headed for the door, her phone rang. It was her son. "Mom, you sure you want to do this alone? I can come with you if you want." Grace smiled at his protective instinct. "I'm sure, baby, this is between me and Bella, but I appreciate you offering. I just worry about you getting even more tangled up in all this. That family, they're complicated. Rich people problems are different from our problems." Isabella isn't rich people problems. She's just a girl who needs someone to care about her. Money doesn't change that. "I know, Mom, I know. Just be careful, okay? Call me when you're done." The facility where Isabella was staying was called Riverside Haven, located about 30 minutes outside the city. It sat on a beautiful piece of property overlooking a river, surrounded by gardens and walking paths. Grace had researched it online and learned it cost more per week than Grace made in 3 months. But she tried not to think about that. Money shouldn't matter when it came to caring for someone. She drove her modest sedan through the gates, past the security checkpoint where they her name on the visitor list, and up the winding driveway to the main building. It looked more like a luxury resort than a treatment facility, all glass and modern architecture blending with the natural landscape. Inside, a friendly receptionist checked her in and called for someone to escort her to Isabella's room. A young woman in professional attire appeared within minutes, introducing herself as Dr. Sarah Williams, one of Isabella's therapists. "Ms. Mitchell, it's so good to meet you," Dr. Williams said, shaking Grace's hand warmly. "Isabella talks about you constantly. You've been incredibly important to her recovery." "I didn't do anything special," Grace said, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just spent time with her." That's exactly what she needed. Someone who didn't have an agenda, who wasn't trying to fix her or change her, just someone who cared. As they walked through the facility, Dr. Williams explained Isabella's progress. She was speaking regularly now, participating in therapy sessions, and even starting to engage in some group activities with other patients. But she still struggled with anxiety and guilt, still had nightmares about the accident, still had a long road ahead. "One thing you should know," Dr. Williams said as they approached Isabella's wing, "is that Richard has also been here. He visits twice a week, always at Isabella's invitation. They're working through things in family therapy, and it's been difficult but productive." Grace was surprised. Isabella is seeing her father. Yes, after he publicly admitted to everything and took full responsibility, something shifted for Isabella. She's not ready to forgive him, and maybe she never will be, but she's open to understanding him. That's a big step. They stopped outside a door with a small window. Through it, Grace could see a comfortable room with soft furniture, plants on the windowsill, and artwork on the walls. Isabella was sitting in an armchair, reading a book, her profile illuminated by afternoon sunlight. "I'll give you two some privacy," Dr. Williams said. "Just press the button by the door when you're ready to leave, and someone will come escort you out. Take all the time you need." Grace took a deep breath and knocked softly before entering. Isabella looked up from her book, and her face transformed. The guarded, tense expression melted away, replaced by genuine joy. "Grace," Isabella set her book aside and stood up, and for the first time, Grace saw her move without the wheelchair. The girl was thinner than she should be, and she moved carefully, but she was walking. "Look at you standing on your own," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. "Physical therapy has been helping. I'm getting stronger." Isabella crossed the room and, without hesitation, wrapped her arms around Grace in a tight hug. Grace hugged her back, feeling the fragility of the girl's frame but also the strength in her grip. They stood like that for a long moment, both of them crying softly. When they finally pulled apart, Isabella gestured to the seating area. "Please sit. I've been waiting all morning for you to get here." They settled into the comfortable chairs, and for a moment neither knew quite what to say. Finally, Grace spoke. "How are you really doing, sweetheart? Not the official answer you give the doctors, but the truth." Isabella considered the question carefully. "I'm better than I was. The nightmares are still bad sometimes, but they're getting less frequent. I'm starting to remember who I was before the accident, or at least imagine who I could become now. But it's hard, Grace. Everything is so hard." "I know, honey. Healing isn't a straight line. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes you feel worse before you feel better." "That's what Dr. Williams says, too. She keeps reminding me that progress isn't always visible." Grace reached over and took Isabella's hand. "I'm proud of you, Bella. What you did, speaking out like that, it took tremendous courage. I couldn't have done it without you. The things you said to me that day about telling the truth even when it's hard, that changed everything." Isabella paused, her grip on Grace's hand tightening. "But I'm sorry I put you through all this. The reporters, the attention, all of it. I didn't think about how it would affect you." "Don't you apologize for that. Not ever. Yes, it's been overwhelming, and yes, my life is different now, but you know what? I'm grateful. I'm grateful I got to know you. I'm grateful I could help even in a small way, and I'm grateful that speaking the truth brought you some freedom." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "You weren't just a small help, Grace. You saved me. I don't think I would have survived another year living with that lie. I was drowning, and you threw me a lifeline." "You saved yourself, baby girl. I just reminded you that you could." They talked for a while about lighter things. Isabella told Grace about the other patients she had met, about the art therapy sessions she was enjoying, about the books she had been reading. Grace shared stories about her grandbabies, about the garden she was planning to start in the spring, about the cooking class she was thinking of taking. It felt natural and easy, the way it had during all those afternoons in the hospital when Grace would talk and Isabella would listen in silence. Except now Isabella could respond, could share her own thoughts and reactions, and that made everything feel more real, more like a genuine relationship. After a while, Isabella's expression grew serious. "Grace, can I ask you something?" "Anything, honey." "Why did you do it? Why did you spend so much time with me when I couldn't even respond? You had no reason to think I would ever speak again. Most people would have given up." Grace thought about the question, wanting to give an honest answer. "When my husband died, I went through a period where I didn't want to talk to anyone. I was drowning in grief and I just wanted to be left alone. But there was this neighbor, Mrs., who refused to leave me alone. She would bring food, sit with me even when I wouldn't talk, just be present. At the time, I found it annoying. I wanted her to go away and let me suffer in peace." Isabella listened intently, her eyes never leaving Grace's face. "But looking back now, I realize she saved my life. Just her presence, her refusal to let me disappear into my grief, it kept me tethered to the world. So when I saw you, so young and already carrying such pain, I recognized that same drowning feeling. And I thought, if I can be for her what Mrs. was for me, then maybe I can help." "Did you ever imagine it would turn into this, that we would develop such a deep connection?" "No," Grace admitted. "I thought I was just being kind to a patient who needed kindness. I never expected to feel like you were my daughter. But the heart knows what it needs, I suppose. My boys are grown with families of their own. I had space in my life for someone to care about, and you had space in your life for someone to care about you. It worked out the way it was supposed to." Isabella wiped at her eyes. "The other day, someone here, another patient, she asked me about you. She said, 'Is that cafeteria lady really like your mom?' And you know what I realized? You are. Not like my mom, you are my mom, not by blood, but by choice, by showing up and caring and being there even when I couldn't give you anything in return." Grace felt her own tears flowing freely now. "And you're my daughter, Bella. Maybe I didn't give birth to you, but you're mine in all the ways that matter." They sat together crying and laughing, the weight of their shared acknowledgement settling over them like a blessing. This strange, unexpected bond that had formed between them was real and valid and beautiful, regardless of what anyone else might think. Eventually, Isabella wiped her face and took a shaky breath. "There's something else I need to tell you, something I've been working through in therapy." "What is it, honey?" I've been talking with my father, really talking for the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever. Isabella's voice was uncertain, as if she wasn't sure how Grace would react to this news. Dr. Williams mentioned that. How do you feel about it? Conflicted, angry still, but also sad. Sad for him, which feels weird to say. He's been coming here twice a week and he's different. Or maybe I'm just seeing him clearly for the first time. He's not this powerful, untouchable figure anymore. He's just a man who made terrible choices out of fear and pride, and now he's trying to live with the consequences. Grace squeezed Isabella's hand encouragingly. That's very mature of you, being able to see his humanity even after what he did. I'm not ready to forgive him. I don't know if I ever will be. But I'm trying to understand him, and I think he's genuinely trying to change. He told me that meeting you helped him realize what he should have been. Me, Grace was shocked. What do you mean? He said that knowing someone like you existed, someone who cared for me without any ulterior motive, made him see how far he had fallen from being a real parent. He said you showed him what unconditional love actually looks like. Grace didn't know what to say to that. The idea that she had somehow influenced Richard, a man she had never even met, was strange and unsettling. Actually, Isabella continued, he's asked if he could meet you. I told him I'd ask you first. You don't have to say yes. I'll understand completely if you don't want to see him. Grace considered this carefully. Part of her was curious about Richard, wanted to understand the man who had caused his daughter so much pain. But another part was wary, worried about getting drawn further into family dynamics that were complicated and potentially harmful. Can I think about it? Grace asked finally. Of course, there's no pressure. I just wanted you to know he asked. They spent another hour together, walking through the facility's gardens despite the cold weather, talking about Isabella's plans for the future. She wanted to finish high school, maybe attend college, though she wasn't sure what she wanted to study. She wanted to write about her experience someday, to help other people who were struggling with guilt or trauma. She wanted to do something meaningful with her life. You've been given a second chance, Grace told her as they stood by the river watching the water flow past. Not many people get that. Use it wisely, baby girl. I will, I promise I will. When it was time for Grace to leave, Isabella hugged her tightly. Will you come back, please? I know you have your own life, your own family, but you're so important to me. Of course I'll come back, as often as they'll let me. You're stuck with me now, Isabella. Isabella smiled through her tears. Grace Mitchell, that's the best news I've heard in a long time. As Grace drove home, her mind was full of the day's conversations. She thought about the bond she had formed with this girl, about how unexpected and beautiful it was. She thought about Richard and his request to meet her. She thought about how one simple act of kindness had spiraled into something that had changed multiple lives. When she got home, she called to let him know she was safe. Then she made herself a cup of tea and sat in her favorite chair, looking out at the city lights. Her life would never be the same as it was before Isabella's press conference. But Grace was beginning to understand that different didn't necessarily mean worse. She had a daughter now, not by blood but by choice. She had purpose again, someone who needed her and valued her presence. And she had been reminded of something she had always believed but sometimes forgot, that small acts of kindness could have profound impacts, that showing up and caring mattered more than grand gestures or expensive gifts. Her phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. Thank you for today, thank you for everything. I love you, Mom. Grace typed back through tears. I love you too, baby girl, always and forever. 3 days later, Grace received a formal letter delivered to her apartment by courier. It was from Richard, handwritten on expensive stationery. The letter was surprisingly humble, acknowledging the harm he had caused his daughter and expressing his gratitude for Grace's role in Isabella's recovery. At the end, he repeated his request to meet her, adding, I understand if you refuse. I have no right to ask anything of you. But if you would be willing, I would like the chance to thank you in person and to better understand the woman who has become so important to my daughter. Whatever you decide, please know that I am grateful Isabella has you in her life. Grace read the letter 3 times, considering. Finally, she picked up her phone and called Isabella. Your father wrote to me, Grace said. He wants to meet. I know, he told me he was going to reach out. What are you going to do? I think I'm going to say yes. Not for him, but for you. If there's going to be healing in your family, even partial healing, then maybe it helps for me to understand both sides of the story. Are you sure? Grace, I don't want you to feel obligated. I'm sure. Besides, I have some things I want to say to him, mother to father. Isabella laughed softly. He has no idea what he's getting into, does he? No, honey, he really doesn't. A week later, Grace found herself back at Riverside Haven, but this time she was meeting Richard in one of the family therapy rooms. Dr. Williams had offered to facilitate the meeting, ensuring it stayed productive and didn't become confrontational. When Richard entered the room, Grace was struck by how diminished he seemed. This was not the powerful billionaire she had seen on magazine covers. This was a man who looked tired and broken, older than his years. His expensive suit couldn't hide the defeat in his posture. He stopped when he saw her, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Then Richard crossed the room and extended his hand. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for agreeing to meet me. Grace shook his hand, nodding its slight tremor. Mr. They sat down across from each other, with Dr. Williams' position nearby but giving them space. Richard seemed unsure how to begin. Finally, Grace spoke. Your daughter is a remarkable young woman. She is, thanks to you. No, thanks to herself, thanks to her own strength and courage. I just gave her a safe space to find those things again. Richard nodded, his eyes glistening. I know what I did was unforgivable. I put my own fear and pride ahead of my daughter's. I let her carry guilt that should have been mine to bear. I have no excuses. No, you don't, Grace agreed. But you're here now, you're trying, that counts for something. Does it? Can it possibly make up for 2 years of her life that I stole? Nothing can make up for that, but moving forward honestly, that's a start. They talked for over an hour, Richard asking questions about Grace's time with Isabella, Grace sharing stories and observations. She was honest about her anger at what he had done, but she also acknowledged that he seemed genuinely remorseful. The thing I can't understand, Grace said at one point, is how you could watch your own child suffering and still maintain the lie. How could you do that to her? Richard's face crumpled. I convinced myself I was protecting her, that if the truth came out, the scandal would hurt her more than the lie did, but really I was just protecting myself. I was a coward. Yes, you were, but you don't have to stay one. Richard looked up at her with something like hope in his eyes. What do you mean? I mean that you have a choice now. You can wallow in guilt and regret, or you can spend whatever time Isabella is willing to give you trying to build something real. It won't be what you had before. It probably won't ever be a normal father-daughter relationship. But it could be something honest, something worth having. Do you think she'll ever forgive me? Grace thought about this carefully. I don't know. That's her choice to make, and it might take years. But I think if you keep showing up, keep being honest, keep putting her needs ahead of your own, then maybe someday you'll have something real together. Will you help? Will you keep being part of her life? Mister, I'm not part of her life because of you or in spite of you. I'm part of her life because she and I chose each other. That's not going to change regardless of what happens between you two. Richard nodded, understanding. I'm glad she has you, truly. She deserves someone who puts her first. As the meeting ended and Grace prepared to leave, Richard spoke one more time. Ms. Mitchell, I know this is asking a lot, but would you consider allowing me to set up a fund for you? Not as payment for what you've done, but as a way to make your life easier. You've given my daughter so much. Grace turned to look at him, her expression firm. Mister, I don't want your money. I never did this for money or recognition or anything else. I did it because it was the right thing to do. If you want to do something meaningful, donate to the hospital, fund programs for patients who can't afford care, help people who actually need it. But don't try to pay me for caring about your daughter. That's not how this works. Richard looked chastened but also strangely impressed. You're right, I apologize, old habits. Grace softened slightly. I appreciate the thought, but the only thing I want from you is for you to be a better father to Isabella. That's the only payment that matters. As Grace left Riverside Haven that day, she felt lighter somehow. The meeting with Richard had been difficult but necessary. She understood him better now, saw him as a flawed human being rather than a villain. That didn't excuse what he had done, but it made the path forward clearer. 6 months had passed since Isabella's press conference, and the world had moved on to new scandals and new stories. But for the people at the center of that November afternoon, everything had fundamentally changed in ways both large and small. Isabella stood in front of the mirror in Grace's modest apartment, adjusting the collar of her graduation dress. She was 18 now, having celebrated her birthday quietly with Grace, her father, and a small group of friends from her new school. The girl reflected in the mirror was different from the one who had sat silent in a hospital room 2.5 years ago. Her eyes held confidence along with the lingering sadness. Her posture was straight and strong. She looked like someone who had survived something terrible and come out the other side. "You look beautiful, baby girl," Grace said from the doorway, her voice thick with emotion. Isabella turned and smiled, that genuine smile that still sometimes surprised people who had only known her during her darkest days. "Do you think this dress is okay? It's not too simple." "It's perfect. You're perfect." Grace crossed the room and pulled Isabella into a hug, careful not to wrinkle the pale blue dress they had picked out together last week. Today was Isabella's graduation from Riverside Haven's educational program. She had been working with private tutors for the past 6 months, making up the coursework she had missed during her 2 years of silence. It hadn't been easy. There had been difficult days when the work seemed overwhelming, when the memories threatened to pull her back into darkness. But Isabella had persevered, and Grace had been there for every late-night study session, every moment of doubt, every small victory. "I can't believe this day is finally here," Isabella said, pulling back from the hug. "6 months ago, I wasn't sure I'd ever finish high school. I wasn't sure I'd ever do anything normal again. But you did it. You worked so hard and you did it." Isabella moved to the window, looking down at the street below where Grace's car was parked. "Is my father coming today?" "He said he would be. He hasn't missed one of your important days yet, has he?" "No, he hasn't." Isabella's relationship with her father was still complicated, still marked by difficult conversations and painful honesty. But it was improving slowly. Richard had kept his word about taking responsibility for his actions. He had given a full confession to the authorities, cooperated with the investigation into the accident, and accepted the consequences that came with telling the truth. He had been forced to step down as CEO of Technologies, though he remained a major shareholder. He had paid substantial fines for insurance fraud and making false statements to police. His reputation, once built on innovation and success, was now permanently marked by his deception. But through it all, he had maintained his relationship with Isabella, showing up week after week for therapy sessions, family dinners, and important milestones. It wasn't the father-daughter relationship Isabella had once imagined having. They would never have that easy, trusting bond. Too much damage had been done. But they had something real now, built on honesty rather than lies. Richard had learned to listen instead of control, to support instead of manage. And Isabella was learning to see him as a flawed person trying to do better, rather than the villain of her story. "Grace," Isabella said, turning from the window, "I've been thinking about something. After graduation, after I take some time to decompress, I want to start working on that book I've been planning, the one about my experience." "The memoirs?" "Yes, but I want it to be more than just my story. I want to include other voices, other perspectives. I want to include your story too, if you'd be willing." Grace looked surprised. "My story? Honey, I'm nobody special. I'm just a cafeteria worker who tried to help." "That's exactly why your story matters, because you show that you don't have to be rich or powerful to make a profound difference in someone's life. You show that simple kindness consistently given can save a person. People need to hear that." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "If you think it would help, then of course you can include my story. I'd be honored." "And I want to start a foundation," Isabella continued, her excitement building. "Something to help other people who are struggling with trauma, who feel like they can't speak their truth. I want to create safe spaces and support systems so no one else has to suffer in silence the way I did." "That's a beautiful idea. Have you talked to your father about it?" "Actually, I have. He's offered to help fund it, but I want to make sure it's truly independent from him. I don't want people thinking it's just his redemption project. It needs to be mine, something I build because I understand what it's like to need that kind of help." Grace smiled proudly. "You're going to change lives, Isabella. I know you will." They finished getting ready and drove to Riverside Haven together. The graduation ceremony was small, just a handful of students who had completed the program and their families. But the room was decorated beautifully with flowers and banners, and there was an atmosphere of genuine celebration. Richard was already there when they arrived, standing near the back of the room. He looked different from the powerful businessman he had once been. He had lost weight, and there were more gray hairs at his temples, but there was also something softer about him, more human. When he saw Isabella, his face lit up with genuine joy. "Congratulations, sweetheart," he said, approaching carefully, always conscious now of respecting her boundaries. "I'm so proud of you." "Thank you, Father." Isabella accepted his hug, brief but real. Richard turned to Grace, extending his hand. Over the past months, they had developed a cordial relationship built on their shared concern for Isabella. It wasn't friendship exactly, but it was mutual respect. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for being here." "I wouldn't miss it for the world, mister." The ceremony began, and one by one, the students walked across the small stage to receive their diplomas. When Isabella's name was called, Grace found herself crying openly, watching this girl who had become her daughter take this significant step forward. Isabella's graduation speech was brief but powerful. She spoke about the journey from silence to voice, about the people who had supported her along the way, and about the importance of truth even when it's painful. "I stand here today not because I was strong," Isabella said, her voice clear and steady, "but because I had people around me who believed I could be. People who refused to give up on me even when I had given up on myself. To my therapists and teachers here at Riverside Haven, thank you. To my father, who is learning that being a parent means showing up even when it's hard, thank you. And to Grace Mitchell, who taught me what unconditional love looks like, who became my mother when I needed one most, thank you. I am here because of all of you." After the ceremony, there was a small reception. Grace found herself approached by other parents and staff members, people who wanted to meet the woman Isabella had credited with her recovery. It was overwhelming and uncomfortable, but Grace handled it with her characteristic grace and humility. Dr. Williams pulled Grace aside at one point, wanting to thank her personally. "What you did for Isabella, what you continue to do, it's remarkable. In all my years working with trauma patients, I've rarely seen such a profound bond form." "I just did what anyone would do," Grace protested. "No, that's where you're wrong. Most people wouldn't have persevered the way you did. Most people would have given up when Isabella didn't respond. You saw her as a person worth caring about, not a patient to be fixed. That made all the difference." Later, as the reception was winding down, Isabella pulled Grace aside to a quiet corner. "I have something for you. I was going to wait until we were alone, but I can't hold it in anymore." She handed Grace a wrapped package, watching nervously as Grace opened it. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with Grace's initials embossed on the cover. When Grace opened it, she found a handwritten letter from Isabella on the first page. "Dear Grace," it read, "this journal is for you to write your own story, the one I know you've been thinking about but haven't started yet. You've spent so much of your life caring for others, supporting their dreams and healing their wounds. Now it's time for you to focus on yourself, on your own thoughts and dreams and memories. Whatever you write in these pages, whether it's your life story or daily observations or dreams for the future, I want you to know that your voice matters. Your story matters. Just as you encouraged me to find my voice again, I'm encouraging you to use yours. With all my love and gratitude, your daughter, Isabella." Grace couldn't speak. She clutched the journal to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "Do you like it?" Isabella asked anxiously. "I love it, baby girl, I love it so much." "There's more," Isabella said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I've been talking with a lawyer. I want to know if you would consider letting me add you to my family legally. Not adoption exactly, since I'm 18, but there are ways to make our relationship official. Ways to acknowledge that you're my mother in every way that matters." Grace's knees went weak. "Isabella, are you sure? That's such a big step." "I've never been more sure of anything. You're my family, Grace. You have been for a long time. I just want to make it official." "What does your father think about this?" "He supports it. He understands that you being my mother doesn't diminish his role as my father. We can both be her parents, just in different ways." Grace pulled Isabella into a tight embrace, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. "Yes, yes, of course, I would be honored." Richard approached them, sensing the emotional moment. "Everything okay over here?" "Better than okay," Isabella said, wiping her eyes. Grace said yes. Richard smiled, and there was genuine warmth in it. "I'm glad. Isabella needs all the family she can get. We all do." As the day wound down and they prepared to leave Riverside Haven, Grace felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. 6 months ago, her life had been simple and predictable. She had been a cafeteria worker looking forward to retirement, visiting her occasionally, living quietly. Now she had a daughter. Not by birth but by choice, by showing up day after day, by caring when no one expected her to. She had become part of a complicated story that had made national headlines. She had been thrust into a world of wealth and power that should have been foreign to her. But through it all, she had remained herself. She hadn't let the attention change who she was. She had continued to be the kind, patient, loving person she had always been, and somehow that had been exactly what Isabella needed. 3 months later, Grace and Isabella stood in a courthouse, making their relationship official through legal documentation. It wasn't a traditional adoption, but it was a formal acknowledgement that Isabella was now also Isabella Mitchell, that Grace Mitchell was listed as her legal guardian and parent, and that they were family in every way that mattered. Richard was there, standing beside them, supporting this unusual arrangement. He had learned that loving his daughter meant letting her build the family she needed, even if it looked different from what he had imagined. After the brief ceremony, they went to Grace's apartment for a celebration. Grace had cooked Isabella's favorite meal, and her sons and David had come with their families. Richard stayed for a little while, awkward but trying, before excusing himself to give them space for their family time. As Grace watched Isabella laughing with her grandbabies, helping them with a puzzle on the living room floor, she felt overwhelmed with joy. This strange, wonderful family they had created was imperfect and unconventional, but it was real and filled with love. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, and it was just Grace and Isabella cleaning up together, Isabella spoke quietly. "I've been thinking about Mom. My birth mother, Caroline. I used to feel guilty, like loving you meant I was betraying her memory, but I don't feel that way anymore." "What changed?" Grace asked, carefully drying a plate. "I realized that my mother would have wanted this for me. She would have wanted me to have someone like you in my life. She would have been grateful that I found love and support and a second chance at having a mother. She wouldn't see it as replacement. She would see it as a blessing." Grace set down the dish towel and took Isabella's hands. "Your mother sounds like she was a wonderful woman. I wish I could have met her. I think you two would have liked each other. You both had this way of seeing the best in people, of caring without expecting anything in return." "Tell me about her. I want to know." So Isabella did, sharing memories of Caroline that she had locked away for so long. Stories about baking together on Sunday mornings, about Caroline's terrible singing voice that never stopped her from singing anyway, about her love of old movies and her habit of crying at every wedding scene. Grace listened, storing away these precious pieces of Isabella's history, honoring the woman who had given birth to the girl who had become her daughter. The following year brought more changes. Isabella started college, studying psychology with the goal of eventually working with trauma survivors. She published articles about her experience, speaking engagements at schools and conferences, always emphasizing the importance of truth and the power of simple kindness. The foundation she had envisioned became a reality. The Isabella and Caroline Foundation, named for both mothers, provided support and resources for people struggling with trauma and guilt. It offered therapy, support groups, educational programs, and safe spaces for healing. Grace became involved with the foundation too, leading a program specifically focused on visiting patients who had no family support. She trained volunteers in the art of patient presence, teaching them what she had learned through her time with Isabella. That sometimes the most powerful healing comes from simply showing up and caring. Richard donated generously to the foundation, but true to Isabella's wishes, he remained in the background. His relationship with Isabella continued to improve gradually. They would never have the easy bond some fathers and daughters shared, but they had something perhaps more valuable, a relationship built on hard-won honesty and genuine effort. 2 years after the press conference, on the anniversary of Caroline's death, Isabella, Grace, and Richard visited Caroline's grave together. It was the first time Isabella had been able to visit since the funeral, the first time she could face her mother's memory without being crushed by false guilt. They stood together in the quiet cemetery, three people connected by tragedy and healing, by mistakes and forgiveness, by the complicated bonds of family. Isabella placed flowers on the grave, blue roses that had been Caroline's favorite. Then she spoke aloud, her voice steady. "Hi, Mom, I'm sorry it took me so long to come back here. I'm sorry I let Dad's lies keep me away, keep me silent. But I'm speaking now. I'm telling my truth. And I'm okay. Not perfect, not healed completely, but okay." She paused, taking a breath. I want you to know about someone. Her name is Grace, and she's become my mother, too. I know that might sound strange, but I think you'd understand. I think you'd be happy I found her or she found me. She gives me what I need now: unconditional love, support, someone to call when I'm scared or confused or just need to hear a friendly voice. Richard stood silently, tears running down his face as Isabella continued. And Dad's trying, Mom, really trying. It's hard, and sometimes I'm still so angry at him, but we're working on it. We're being honest with each other, finally. I think you'd be proud of that. Grace stayed back a little, giving Isabella space, but remaining close enough to offer support if needed. She thought about Caroline, this woman she had never met but whose daughter she now helped raise. She hoped Caroline would approve, would understand that Grace's love for Isabella wasn't meant to replace what Caroline had given but to complement it, to continue it. As they walked back to the car, Isabella linked one arm through Grace's and offered the other to Richard. The three of them walked together, an unusual family forged through tragedy and healing, through truth and forgiveness. I'm hungry, Isabella said as they reached the parking lot. Can we get dinner together, all three of us? Richard looked surprised by the invitation but pleased. I'd like that. Me too, Grace agreed. They went to a small diner, nothing fancy, and sat in a booth together. They talked about Isabella's classes, about the foundation's recent successes, about Richard's new venture helping other companies develop ethical business practices. It was comfortable and almost normal, this gathering of Isabella's two parents. At one point, Isabella excused herself to use the restroom, leaving Grace and Richard alone together. Thank you, Richard said quietly once Isabella was out of earshot, for everything you've done for her, for giving her what I couldn't. You're giving her what she needs now, Grace replied. That's what matters, not what happened before, but what you're choosing to do now. I'll never be the father I should have been, I know that, but maybe I can be the father she needs going forward. That's all any of us can do, mister. Show up, be honest, and love the best way we know how. When Isabella returned, she found her two parents in comfortable silence, and something in her heart settled. This was her family now. Complicated, imperfect, marked by past pain but working toward healing. It wasn't what she had once imagined her life would be, but it was real and it was hers. 5 years after the press conference, Grace stood in the audience at Isabella's college graduation, this time from a prestigious university. Isabella had graduated with honors, her research on trauma recovery earning academic recognition. She had job offers from multiple organizations, all wanting her insight and passion for helping others. But what made Grace's heart swell most wasn't Isabella's academic achievements. It was seeing the young woman she had become, confident, compassionate, honest, and strong. Isabella had taken her tragedy and transformed it into purpose. She had found her voice and was using it to help others find theirs. After the ceremony, as they celebrated at Grace's apartment once again, now familiar ground for their family gatherings, Isabella made an announcement. I've decided which job offer to accept. I'm going to work at a hospital, developing a program for patients recovering from trauma. And I want Grace to help me design it, to train the staff in what she taught me. That presence and patience and genuine caring can change lives. Grace's eyes widened. Honey, I'm just a cafeteria worker. I don't have formal training in psychology or therapy. No, but you have something more valuable. You have wisdom and compassion and real experience. You know what it means to show up for someone day after day, to care without expecting results or recognition. That's what I want to teach others. Richard, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. I think that's brilliant, Isabella, and if you need any funding to support the program, the foundation can help. Actually, Isabella said, smiling at her father, I was hoping you might want to be involved too, not financially but personally. The program will need volunteers, people willing to visit patients and just be present. I thought maybe you might consider it. Richard looked shocked. You want me to volunteer? I think it would be good for you, and for the patients. You understand what it means to make mistakes and work on becoming better. That's valuable perspective. I don't know if I'd be any good at it. Neither did I when I started, Grace interjected. But you learn by doing, and Isabella's right. People need to see that healing and change are possible no matter what you've done. Richard thought about it for a moment, then nodded. Okay, I'll try. I can't promise I'll be good at it, but I'll try. Isabella beamed at him. That's all anyone can ask. As the celebration continued, Grace found a quiet moment to step out onto her small balcony. She looked out at the city lights, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. 5 years ago, she had been a lonely woman working in a hospital cafeteria, her children grown and gone, her days predictable and safe. Now she had a daughter. She had purpose. She had become part of a story that had touched thousands of people, inspiring others to speak their truth and to recognize the power of simple kindness. Isabella joined her on the balcony, wrapping a blanket around both of their shoulders against the cool evening air. "What are you thinking about?" Isabella asked. "About how strange life is. How one choice to be kind, to spend a few extra minutes with a patient who couldn't respond, led to all of this. It wasn't just one choice, though. It was hundreds of choices every single day to keep showing up, to keep caring." "I suppose that's true. Grace, can I tell you something?" "Always, baby girl. You saved my life. I need you to know that. Not in an abstract way, not in a you help me get better way. You literally saved my life. There were days when I wanted to give up completely, when the weight of the lies and guilt felt like too much to bear. But then you would come in with a meal and a story, and suddenly the world felt a little less dark. You gave me hope when I had none. You showed me that I was worth caring about when I felt worthless." Grace pulled Isabella closer, both of them crying now. "You saved my life too, you know. I was just going through the motions before I met you. Working, existing, but not really living. You gave me purpose again. You reminded me what it means to love someone completely." They stood together in the cool night air, mother and daughter, not by blood but by choice and commitment and unwavering love. Behind them, through the open door, they could hear Richard and Grace's sons laughing about something, the sound of family being family. "I love you, Mom," Isabella whispered. "I love you too, baby girl, always and forever." The city stretched out before them, full of light and possibility. Somewhere out there were other people struggling with secrets and guilt, other people who felt voiceless and alone. Isabella would spend her life trying to help them, to create the support systems and safe spaces she wished she had during her darkest days. And Grace would be right there beside her, showing others what she had shown Isabella. That healing begins with presence, that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply show up and care. Their story, which had begun with silence and tragedy, had transformed into something beautiful and life-affirming. It was a testament to the power of truth, to the importance of chosen family, and to the profound impact one person can have on another through consistent, genuine kindness. As they stood together on that balcony, surrounded by the love they had built together, both Grace and Isabella understood that they had found something rare and precious. They had found each other, and in doing so, they had both found themselves. The billionaire's daughter had spoken after 2 years of silence, and in speaking, she had called a black waitress Mom. It had shocked the world, made headlines, and sparked important conversations about family, trauma, and healing. But for Grace and Isabella, it was simply the truth. A truth that had set them both free and given them a future full of hope, purpose, and unconditional love. And that truth would continue to echo through the lives they touched, the programs they created, and the countless people who would hear their story and find the courage to speak their own truths, to seek help, to believe that healing was possible. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary stories begin with the simplest acts of kindness. And sometimes, the family we choose becomes the family that saves us. She had a daughter now, and that daughter had a father who was trying to change. It was complicated and messy and uncertain, but it was real. And Grace had learned long ago that real, messy love was better than perfect fantasy any day build a relationship with his daughter, than it was worth any price for the truth. And for the strange, unexpected bond that had formed between a grieving billionaire's daughter and a cafeteria worker, who had simply chosen to carry, as reporters began shouting questions all at once. Security struggled to maintain order, and Richard stood frozen, watching his carefully constructed world collapse around him.